Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Borhene Chakroun, Director of Policies and Lifelong Learning at UNESCO. Dr. Chakroun is an engineer and has a PhD in education sciences from Borhene University in France. He worked during the 1990s as trainer, chief trainer, project manager, and has also worked as short-term consultant for the EU, World Bank, and other international organizations before moving to the European Training Foundation, ETF, in 2001. At the ETF, Borhene worked as Senior Human Capital Development Specialist. He is now Director of Policies and Lifelong Learning Systems Division at UNESCO headquarters, where he has conducted a range of policy reviews and skills systems diagnoses in different contexts. He has authored and co-authored various articles and books in the field of skills development and lifelong learning, and much of his most recent work focuses on global trends in reforming education and training systems and global agenda for skills development in the context of 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. He's also the coordinator of the Global Education Coalition, launched by UNESCO to respond to the COVID-19 crisis. I hand over to Dr. Borhene Chakroun, who will give us a UNESCO perspective on interoperable data programs. Thank you, Dr. Chakroun.
Thank you, Chair, and very good morning to you, to all colleagues. I feel privileged and honored today to join you. I also feel sleepy, I must confess, for Monday morning, but I really appreciate that we start very early, and it's good way. In my culture, we say, if you want to start well, start early. So I think it's good sign. Let me say that I'm really interested in this discussion today. I'm coming to share perspective from UNESCO, but I'm also I would like to learn from the discussion you are having in South Africa and more internationally on the digital transformation, on the concerns that the chair has presented earlier. And I feel that our discussion today is also timely for what is happening internationally. I must say that, of course, we need to consider the situation we are having today and call for peace, call for engagement and international, I would say, acceptance of the differences that we may have, of the concerns that we may have. But obviously, I would like to start my word with the word of peace and word of intercultural dialogue. Let me, I'm trying to see if my presentation is shared. Just 1 second. Sorry. And where are we in the response to the COVID, how we are dealing with the COVID crisis. And unfortunately, when we look at what is the data today, and this is the most updated data we have on school closure, on the disruption of education, training, and higher education, we still have around the world more than 40 million people who are affected either by fully closure of the schools and education institution or partial of them. And I think this is something that we need to take into account in discussing how we are dealing with the digital transition, and probably think about it in short-term, mid-term, and long-term perspective rather than taking it as a whole. The situation requires more action today, urgent actions, and some of them are, of course, very important for a million of learners. But broadly speaking, and probably this is something we need to take, is if we look at the impact that the COVID-19 had on education, I feel that we need to pick up 4 important impacts. The first one is that there are significant learning losses with significant inequalities. Learning losses are real, but they are not equal. People who are disadvantaged, people who are not connected, people where the digital transformation in education didn't happen, have been affected mostly from the crisis, and the learning losses where they are very high. It's also impact on lifelong learning opportunities. The learning losses today are affecting further learning, and people who are entering the labor market today with the not sufficient skills will have consequences in their lifelong learning opportunities as they move forward. But we know that the COVID also has economic impact. And according to research we conducted with the World Bank and UNICEF, we know we have calculated and estimated that the impact is around $17 trillion loss in future earning of current learners. That has deep impact on the revenues, on the status in the labor market, and of course on the well-being. And that's the last impact that I wanted to mention. We have evidence of increased anxiety and impact on the well-being of learners, teachers, families as well, and communities. So these impacts, we have to take them seriously when we are speaking about the digital transformation and when we are speaking about areas that your conference is discussing today. But we have also a fact is that there is an emerging global digital learning ecosystem. I put here just examples of the online platform that have been established during the COVID and that continue to be operating. We have mapped most of member states' learning platform, and we know that in most cases, these platforms, of course, have been created or have been operated during the crisis. They were not there before, or they were weakly used and rather not at the center of the education system. But in most cases today, digital learning, hybrid learning is considered as part of the education system. Not everywhere, not at the same level, not with the same quality, and probably it will take time to make this a reality. But there is an ecosystem that is emerging, and we have to recognize it. We have to recognize it both in terms of national development, but also in terms of the international discussion and dialogue, and I will come back to that. We also looked at what are the solutions that have been adopted by member states. And maybe this is an aspect that I would like to highlight for your discussion. When you are speaking about digital transformation, probably we mean high technology. But when we look at the situation across the board, we know that in most cases, member states have used a mix of technologies, from high to low to even very classical technology like media, television, and radio. But even media and television and radio is becoming technologically driven. And when we speak about digital transformation, probably we need to speak about this mix of digital transformations and digital techs. And we need to keep this in mind in our discussion on interoperability, on deployment, and other matters that you are discussing today. I think one aspect that you have to consider, and we have to consider all, is that the digital technology does connect, but it does divide us, and divide us across different parameters. Some of them are economic parameters. The wealthiest families and households are better served than the poorest. The North is better served than the South. The rural are less served than urban. So these digital divides, the people who have skills and have digital skills are better served than the ones who have low skill and who don't have the digital skills. And this means that when we speak about the digital transformation, we shouldn't speak only about the infrastructures, the tubes, the resources. We have to speak also about the skills, human capabilities. And human capabilities are critical if we would like to fill the digital divide. And we know that the digital divide can increase and can deepen very quickly because the technology itself is moving very quickly. So I would like us to really keep in mind that we are living in a digital divide, and that is our responsibility, and we are accountable to the public. The public policies have to be accountable to the public around the digital divide, and what are the strategies that are addressing the digital divide. And interoperability strategies have to take into account the digital divide. Let me say that in last year, we have adopted a connectivity declaration that tries to look at some of these aspects. And there are three dimensions in the connectivity declaration that are important, I believe, for your discussion today. First of all, it relates to the last point I was mentioning right now, is how we center on the most marginalized and address the digital divide and ensure the right to education. Any strategy on digital transformation will have to take this dimension. But second, and I think this is important from both a policy perspective, but also paradigm perspective, either we are steered by the digital and by the technology, or we are steering it. And we feel at UNESCO that we have to steer the digital transformation. It shouldn't be steered by us. And that means that the digital transformation should be driven by our educational needs, the challenges we are facing, the needs of the most marginalized. And it's a paradigm. We need to steer the digital transformation. And this is something that requires collaboration, dialogue, skills, capacities, and strategies that are driven with this perspective. And the last element of the connectivity declaration is about expanding investment. We cannot fill the digital divide. We cannot keep pace with the digital transformation if we are not investing in digital transformation, and if we are not investing, particularly for the most marginalized, for the people who are in a way living in areas which are not covered by the digital transformation and who need our support and the public support. Maybe I was looking at some of the data that we have from the global perspective, and I think some aspect that relates to your discussion today and why we are speaking about interoperability is that we have moved from learning management systems which are rather based in servers, based in specific contexts and specific schools or specific institutions, to more a learning platform ecosystem with the digital technology that are driving the changes, but with the other aspect that I think are important. For example, openness and open education resources, open databases, open learning, broadly speaking. So this paradigm shift is what is driving the discussion also on interoperability, because we have to connect different learning environment, we have to connect different technologies, we have to connect different type of institutions and different contexts, including across the border. But probably the next generation of the digital learning environment will have to take 4 key dimensions that are important. One is what you are discussing, and I think it's important, interoperability. But probably we have also to take into account the personalization of the learning and how much the technology and digital transformation will support all learners and their experience, how it will narrow the digital divide. We know that through the digital transformation and digital investment, we are sitting on a very important data and data sources that we can leverage, and investing in data analytics to support decision making is an important aspect for our discussion. But probably something that is close to the heart of UNESCO is how we can build community of practices, how we can support international cooperation, but how we can join international agreement and what type of international agreement we can agree upon to facilitate interoperability, to support personalization, to support decision-making through data analytics and data analysis, and how we can leverage the knowledge, the expertise, the capacities that we have internationally. And I'm sure that James, with the JET and with the contribution of JET, for example, to UNESCO Univoc International Network, is an important aspect of how we can bring together different institutions from all over the world to share, to build together, rather than to compete only. But I feel that in the discussion we are having, we have to address 2 interconnected challenges. And it's a paradox in a way. One, we have to leverage technology for lifelong learning opportunities. But at the same time, we have to protect the learners, and we have to protect learners' data within a lifelong learning perspective. And it's a paradox, or it's a tension in the sense that we need data to leverage technology and to support lifelong learning opportunities, to support what I mentioned earlier, personalized learning processes, learning pathways, data analytics. But we need children are protected online, and this tension is a tension that we are all facing, and that the public policies will face, including institutions and organizations like yours today. So where do we go from here? I would like to make some suggestions, but obviously the role of the keynote speaker is to open rather than to close the debate. And I hope that this will set some element for your discussion today. First, do we have a vision for interoperability? I think that we might be driven by technology and looking at what technology will offer as interoperability, but I would like us to take a vision, and a vision that goes beyond technology. And the vision that we can suggest is a vision that both UNESCO and ILO have put for us through the work that they have been doing. First, the future of work that International Labour Organization has put, and second, reimagining our futures of education, which is UNESCO production. Those two reports have common denominators. They are human-centered. They consider lifelong learning for all, and they look at sustainable economies and societies, not any economic growth, a sustainable growth, an inclusive growth. And interoperability, when it is a quest for supporting learners, for supporting education system, supporting economies, they have to have this human-centered, right-based perspective. And that's a vision that will drive the different characteristics and the different development that you may have for interoperability. In the Futures of Education report that we published, we are suggesting a new social contract for education. And digital transformation have to be framed within this new social contract. And for that, we are proposing some dimensions: how we transform pedagogies, how we transform curricula, teaching, schools, but also learning in all areas of life, and that's the lifelong learning perspective, and how we can connect the learning spaces. And this is a challenge that we are all facing, how we can collect the learning spaces and recognize the learning that is happening in those different spaces, valorize that, value it for further learning, for economic purposes and employment, but also for social integration and thriving in societies. So I feel that the discussion should remain at the level of what is the objective, the immediate objective of digital transformation or interoperability, but more for a broader vision of a new social contract for education that I hope you can consider in your discussion. And when we deep further, we look at the lifelong learning dimension of the interoperability, and as I mentioned earlier, how we can collect the learning spaces, how we can understand the learning experiences, and how interoperability will help us understand better the learning experiences and value them. Of course, how we can assess and recognize learning, micro-credentials, stacking, and element of interoperability that will support that. But also how we can link learners with relevant learning opportunities and develop a culture of lifelong learning. I feel that the interoperability will have to take those elements of discussion and shouldn't remain on only technical aspect. What are the directions that we are having? And I'm finishing with the two last slide, if you allow me, Chair. First of all, we are taking an important work on data protection as a fundamental human right. And this is something that is, of course, a work of UNESCO, but is a work of UN more broadly. We would like to look at data for individualized learning experience and identity. We think that privacy should be by design. It should be as a trust, and it has to build trust. But it has to be a driver for better policy in the education and training system. And this is the work that together with James we have been doing, and we'll be publishing a report very, very soon. And we feel that these are directions that we'll have to take further in the work we will be doing within UNESCO, and obviously UNESCO with member states and with the organization like yours. But we are asking some questions in work we are doing today and work we are doing also with the Broadband Commission. First, a question on data transparency, how we ensure that that data is transparent, but it's also open to be analyzed and understood by all stakeholders. And of course, this tension I mentioned earlier, opening but protecting. Data fairness, how to ensure that the data fairly represents all learners equitably. We know that in some cases, and including the work on artificial intelligence, data is not representative. It represents a specific target group. It represents sometimes a specific geographies. It doesn't represent necessarily Africa, for example. Data equity, and what are the measures that are taken to mitigate potential bias by gender, by ethnic group, religious aspect, demographic group, socioeconomic status. Those are aspects that we have to take into account when speaking about data, but when speaking about digital transformation broadly. Data privacy, and I spoke about that, but also data ownership. Who owns the data? Who owns the credentials? Who owns the learning, the data on our learning experience? This is something that is critical, and it's a part of the public policy, but it's part of the public, the international dialogue, because they are not, data is no longer data national driven. It can be also international, and the sovereignty, the cross-border flow of data is very important aspect. And let me finish, for us, data as a common good, and how we can advance SDG 4 is, of course, and SDGs more broadly, is something that is very important. There is an important work we are doing on the evolving right to education, and how we place the right to education within the lifelong learning perspective. And I feel that the interoperability discussion, the digital transformation discussion more broadly, has to be driven by those concerns and those objectives that I just mentioned. I would like to thank you for this opportunity to be with you today. I would like to finish with a broad thinking that I've had. A few years ago, I was in Johannesburg, and with colleagues to present a bit what is the futures of credentialing, and what is the future of qualification at that time. And I was presenting different scenarios, and one scenario that I was presenting, I was calling it disruptive credentialing. And this is something that I was thinking that it's an extreme situation that probably will not reach soon, and but that we have to feature it in our thinking, with a strong role of the tech industry, with the new generation of quality assurance modalities, and new generation of credentials. And to be very honest, it was an extreme scenario that I was proposing. But I think that in the post-COVID thinking, that extreme scenario is the scenario of today. And probably we need to think about a new extreme scenario with a metaverse of credentialing ecosystem, where the physical and the digital environment, or the virtual environment, will intersect, where probably the offer is a different offer, that is institutions that are in the physical environment and institutions that are in the virtual environment. Probably populated by content and experiences that are created and operated by a wide range of contributors that are not necessarily the institution we know today, and that are not necessarily regulated and accredited by institutions that we know today. So I feel that we shouldn't neglect this extreme scenario, because we know that the technology is evolving. We have heard about the launch of an initiative on metaverse globally, but also in education. And this metaverse credentialing ecosystem probably would be something that will shape also our thinking as we move forward. And as Roy Amara said, we tend to overestimate the effect of technology in the short run, but underestimate the effect in the long run. And I leave you with this thinking. Thank you very much, and have a successful event today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Borhene Chakroun. It is always such a pleasure to listen to you. You've given us such an extremely thought-provoking and excellent perspective from UNESCO, and you have certainly stimulated our thinking. So I'm sure there's some really critical questions that will come through from the session. But I particularly like your and agree with you on the human-centered approach. I think these are the challenges we are currently facing with our program. You've made us very aware of our responsibilities as we forge ahead and progress with the development, not to ignore the people that we are taking along with us with technology. And I think we are, as you mentioned, all really grappling with the issue of the protection of learner data. I think the contrast between wanting to make decisions with data on a platform, having access to large data sets through interoperability, but also being mindful of developing the agency of people, especially in the lower socioeconomic sectors of our society, and create that awareness of how their own data can be protected, should be protected, and making sure that we seek the right approvals from these citizens in our country. So we do have a few questions that I think I'm just going to look at now. The first one is from Abida Holstock. And Dr. Chakroun, she talks about, she mentions the 5 dimensions do not mention, that you've described, do not mention infrastructure, and particularly hardware versus software and access. In your mind, do you think, is this not one of the biggest issues in Africa, that Africa faces around hardware and access to technology in Africa? I'm not sure, Dr. Chakroun, if you want me to talk, give you a few questions, or you want to take one at a time.
I think we can take 3 questions and I will address them as they come. Thank you so much.
Sure. The second question comes from James Kiwi. Is there a place for international agencies to support countries with common and open platforms? And Dr. Julie Reddy wants to know, how will we mitigate the commodifications of data while protecting the data owner's agency? So I have those 3 for now. Let's see how we go for time. So over to you, Dr. Chakroun.
Thank you so much, Roxana, and thank you for the colleagues who asked this question. Let me take it from starting from James' question and then come to the different the 2 other questions. I would like to build on them. First, do the international organization have a role to play? I think they do have. I believe that it's very hard to regulate technology. It's very hard. It's almost a mission impossible, at least for international organizations like UNESCO. In any case, we don't regulate technology, but we do regulate principles. We do regulate ethics. We do regulate international call it norms regarding recognition and valuing of qualifications, for example. So I feel that that's the terrain that we need to take. Just to say, we have adopted in November a new recommendation on open sciences. And that's part of the discussion we are having. We could have a recommendation on open ecosystem, open learning ecosystem, and we have adopted a recommendation on ethics and artificial intelligence. So we could adopt a recommendation on ethics in interoperability or in a learning ecosystem. I feel that's the direction that we need to take. And I feel that that's the responsibility we have, and a discussion like what we are having today and the work we are doing, I mentioned earlier, can support. I feel that this requires also probably cross agencies collaboration. For example, the ITU in this case with the Telecom and Broadband Commission could be involved in such discussion, because there we have the teleco companies and stakeholders. And there is a space for collaboration in that case. And probably That's something that relates to the question regarding the mitigation. I feel that part of the international agreement, part of the work that we can do in bringing together member states would be how we can mitigate these tensions or these challenges of protecting data, but also leveraging data for better learning, for personalized learning, for lifelong learning perspective. Is there a good practice? I think that there are some element of good practices. For example, to mention in France, there is a very strong data protection laws and rules. The GDPR is one important one at the European level. Probably there are some national legislation that are important. For now, they have been looking more on data in society and economies, less so on education. And we feel that this is the work that we would like to advance. Abida mentioned the importance of the infrastructure, and obviously it relates also on the diversity of the ecosystem across the world. And in some economies, we are still having, we don't have schools, for example, and school building. It's in reality the dimension that we call schools, and the perspective was more to, during the COVID, we understood that school is very important, and that online learning had brought a myth that we can live without schools. We feel that schools are important, not only for learning, but for social integration, for health, for nutrition. But probably we need to rethink schools. We need to rethink the walls. We need to rethink the timetables. We need to think the learning spaces, as I mentioned, and look at learning that is happening in different aspects. And in that case, the infrastructure dimension becomes much broader than just building a school or bringing tables or bringing tubes or computers in one space. We have to think about connectivity of learners, for example, and that's not necessarily connecting only schools to internet or bringing computer into schools. So I feel that the infrastructure dimension has to take into account also our philosophy or the vision we have for learning spaces, for connecting learning spaces, for placing it in a lifelong learning perspective. Over.
Thank you, Dr. Chakroun. We've got more questions. I think we do have some time still. Could we consider a new context where credentials are more than qualifications? Is I think James's question as well, and I believe you are working with James on this aspect, but I think he wants you to expand on that a little bit. And then Melissa King says that these are more easily achievable in the form of just-in-time relevant short courses. So I think the question around this, is there something that we could consider as a new, dimension around credentials? And I know the term micro-credentials are often being talked about now. So that's the only one we have for now. Thank you, Dr. Chakroun.
Thank you, and thanks to James and to Melissa. I think this is an important debate that we should bring in every moment we are discussing those aspects. One is that how and with which lenses we are understanding the evolving credentialing ecosystem. Either we look at it from a lens of the national qualification framework, a more institutionalized perspective on qualification and credentials, and that probably going forward will be a limitation of the way we look at learning and we look at the learning experience. Or we look at it from a much more open perspective. And in that case, considering credentialing or other form of representing the learning experience and the learning outcomes, the learning that we are achieving would be, I would say, a way forward that we have to take in our work. And probably, as I was presenting these extreme scenarios, probably we need to think about this perspective where the physical and the digital or the virtual will have to intersect, including providers, including the learning itself and the learning journey. what does that mean concretely? Because we can speak about it from a very broad perspective and say this is we see an evolving ecosystem that we are looking at and we are analyzing. I feel that we will have to be clear about what is the objective and what is the goal and what is the overall goal. And the overall goal has to be, as you mentioned, Chair, it has to remain human-centered and driven by our quest for the sustainable agenda, for a more humanistic perspective, not by a commercial, not by a technology only driven aspect. I think as a goal, it has to be driven by that. Second is that at the end of the day, we would like that any learning experience or representation is recognized, valued, and is valuable for further learning or for economic purpose or for social purpose. So if it loses that element of valorization for the individual or for the community or for the society, then we have a problem with the credentials or with the way we are presenting them. And third is that this has to be part of probably not only a national or local perspective, but for an international, for cross-border perspective, because the mobility, and again, we need to think about this metaverse perspective, and I'm sorry for using this term today, but the mobility is not only physical one, the mobility is a virtual one. And you can learn sitting in Joburg, learn a program that is and engage in a program that is in Santiago de Chile. So the problem is not a physical one; it's also a virtual, and it's also how we intersect the physical and the virtual. And again, you can earn a credential from across the board, but you like to use it for your local activities. And that dialogue, that collaboration, that agreement. We need to advance, and I feel that we have open avenues that we have to explore, but we are not there yet. And there is still a very heavy institutional perspective on qualifications, which probably will remain in some part, for example, for basic education or for a specific type of credentials and qualification. But more and more, the lifelong journey will be driven by much more flexible, more agile, and potentially a very open credentialing ecosystem. Over.
Thank you, Dr. Borhene. Your areas that you've highlighted in your presentation are things that we are also currently grappling with in South Africa. These are constant current debates that we face as we are building the PSET cloud. And many of your points resonate with us. We faced with the complexity on a daily basis. There are various touch points. We're looking at fragmentation, and then we're looking at collaboration on a systems level. We're looking at organizationals and their own mandates within the PSET cloud in South Africa, PSET sector in South Africa. And you find that we have a plethora of legislation that separates us, but with good intention. And so there's that conversation constantly on how we avoid gaps in the system, but also make sure that we don't duplicate our efforts. So that collaboration is really central to what we are talking about. Perhaps you can share with us, and this is just a question from the chair, on how through UNESCO and the support that you provide, you talk about more international collaboration. We are grappling with systems collaboration in South Africa. How do we actually, what are some of the pointers you can share with us on how we open this conversation so that we all reach for the same objectives? In my experience, I think everybody that we talk to, policymakers, decision makers, implementers, citizens, all want an improvement in their lives, their livelihoods, and similarly recognize the value of lifelong learning. But maybe just share with us on some things that maybe you've succeeded with that we could consider from a systems level and then organizational level. And I know we've touched on a lot on the individual level of interoperability. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I see that the time is running. I have three elements that I would like to mention to respond to your kindly the question and the point you mentioned. The first one, I think, in any discussion, I believe that the transformation should be steered by the stakeholders rather than by the technology. If we are steered by the technology, probably we will run behind a situation that we cannot control. So I think we need to be steered the digital transformation, and this has to be at the center. Second, I feel that we speak a lot about the transformation and the dialogue without thinking about the capacities of the institutions themselves, their ability to engage, the capability of the stakeholders. And I feel that that development, that element of investing in the capacities of the institution is very important. And last is the governance dimension is probably this requires multi-stakeholder dialogue. It cannot be only government organization. It has to be government, has to be civil society, and private sector who is playing an important role. And that's what we are trying to do. For example, at UNESCO, we have a global education coalition that we launched, and it includes UN organization, of course, the government, but also it includes a civil society, a foundation, private sector, media, research institution. And I think that multi-stakeholder collaboration will be very important and will be needed. It cannot be solved by only the public organization in this case. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We wish we could keep you with us for much longer and tap into all your experience and expertise. But as you say, our time session is up. So we certainly would like to chat with you some more, but we take this opportunity of you giving off your time for us this morning. And we really appreciate it on behalf of the whole team, the Preset Cloud team, the Mercita team. Want to really thank you for your inputs this morning. We are going to go on to a short break now. So we will be back, ladies and gentlemen, at 9:30. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.